Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rodney Dawson. I'm the curator of education at the Greensboro History Museum. And this is our last installment of the Holocaust Education series that we started at the beginning of the month. We had some wonderful programs that many of you have attended, and we thank you for your support. And we hope you've learned something. But tonight, as mentioned before, is our last edition. As a matter of fact, it's our last webinar for 2020. Tonight is Women of the Shoah, Art as a Social Sculpture. Today's conversation is made and brought to you in part by the Greensboro History Museum Incorporated, the City of Greensboro, and the Libraries Department. Any views, findings, or recommendations expressed in today's program do not necessarily reflect those aforementioned entities. And if you take time to view the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A icon. By selecting this option, you can type in a question for our panelists. Once you've typed in your question, hit the enter button on your keyboard to submit. We have reserved the latter part of our program to field questions. This evening, we welcome our panelists for the webinar, which will also be available on the Greensboro History Museum's YouTube channel. So at your convenience, please visit www.greensborohistory.org to access our YouTube channel, or go directly to YouTube and conduct a search for the Greensboro History Museum. You see, we have a wonderful panel assembled for you that sacrificed some time and got a wealth of knowledge that I'm excited to get to. And so you can stop hearing from me and hear from these experts that we have. But tonight's panelists include artist Victoria Milstein, Holocaust survivor and educator Shelley Weiner, Executive Director of the Greensboro Jewish Federation, Marilyn Forman Chandler, and Dr. David Crowe. He's the Presidential Fellow at Chapman University and Professor Emeritus of History and Law at Elon University. Plus, I'll be turning over the helm in just a few seconds to the wonderful moderator we have today. I'm not sure if you're hailing from Greensboro, if you're in New York.
I'm in New York.
In New York.
Yes, I am.
None other than Liz Alberti. Thank you very much for you all taking the time to conduct this webinar. And Liz, I'll turn it over to your hands.
First of all, thank you everyone for participating. This is going to be a really exciting evening, and I hope you stay tuned to hear all of the panelists and listen and ask some questions at the end. So I am the Executive Director of Women of the Shoah, Jewish Placemaking. I want to tell you just a bit about the mission because it's the basis of everything we're going to be talking about tonight. So Women of the Shoah combines art as social practice to allow our community to reflect upon, honor, and learn from the plight of the women and children who perished in the Holocaust, the Shoah. The WSJP organizes and catalyzes community, business leaders, and Holocaust survivors and their families to build monuments and create special public space to educate and transform the viewer's perspective on the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, racism, and all genocide of women and children. Our first, and I will be just introducing our wonderful panelists, and our first panelist is Victoria Carlin-Milstein, who is the sculptor on the monument. Victoria is originally from New York. She has lived and traveled around the world and now resides in Greensboro for over 10 years. She studied at the School of Visual Arts in New York City and the Batzallah School of Art in Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. Victoria's portraits hang in public and private collections globally, including the Jewish Theological Seminar and the Supreme Court of North Carolina. Her works have been featured in important international exhibitions, and currently, when not working on our women's project, she serves on numerous community boards and organizations such as the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, and is a recent recipient of the Anna Hummel YWCA Mission Award for her work in establishing Victoria's House, an art center for children and experiencing homelessness. Welcome, Victoria. First, we're going to hear a little video about her, what she's been doing, and then she's going to share her story.
To create a Holocaust memorial in this beautiful garden space would add powerfully to the importance of the celebration of Carolyn LeBauer's life and commitments. Her indomitable spirit would be so aptly represented by these women who stood up in the only way that they had available.
I saw a photo of a group of women, 5 generations of women, right before they were murdered by the Nazis. You see the woman in the middle, the matriarch, she was asked to strip and then she was told to take off her clothes, and she is standing there with those boots on and looking straight at us. Then next to her, you see her daughter, and then the littlest one is this woman's 10-year-old child. I saw in this all of kind of the parts of educating on the Holocaust, remembering women. Genocide of the most powerless in our societies is women and children. And the monument will stand. It will be in bronze. The figures will be about 5.5 feet tall. And the viewer will be asked to actually look at the women through the eyes of the camera. And it's going to be a camera of the type that was used during that day. And it seems like a little thing to do, that you're actually looking through something at a sculpture, but you are bearing witness. You're physically doing something. And I think that's what art education is about. Right now you're seeing it very small, so it's a little bit more unfinished. I call it a study. So from this, it gets blown up digitally into like foam pieces that are kind of, it's kind of straight foam pieces of the shape. Comes into my studio, and then I paint the liquid clay on it, and then I start resculpting it. With just a little flick of your knife, you can change the expression. So my challenge is that in the photograph, I don't have a three-dimensional, I don't have a model. So I've been taking groups of women, and they've been coming to my studio, and we've been photographing them arm in arm. So I've invited Shirley Fry, I've invited Sylvia Birkenhamel and Marilyn Chandler and Judy Maguire and Shelley Weiner, who's a Holocaust survivor. I've invited them to come and pose as these women. These women are also serving as my models. And as I look at the way they're posing and how their emotions, I'm also being affected by it. This is not just about Jewish women. It's about all women that have experienced hatred. It's history that we have to teach. We'll also be doing workshops. We're talking with Ann Parsons from UNCG and Elon College. We have a scholar in residence, David Crowe. And we started a nonprofit called Women of the Shoah Placemaking. Art is a voice, a monument that speaks about injustice and women, and that brings together the community is a wonderful thing to have in Greensboro.
And the woman who refused to take off her boots showed that we each can have a way to stand up and resist that which is insufferable, intolerable, and inhumane. It truly speaks volumes for the power of human resistance to forces of evil and injustice. And it helps us all, each of us, understand that we each have the power to find our voice and translate that into actions and deeds.
Victoria?
Hi, thank you, Rodney and Liz, and thank you everyone for being here. And I'm just going to take, some time and talk about this project as out of the eyes and voice of the artist, and the what, when, why, and where of this project. The inspiration for this project is the incident that happened in La Paya. We have a Holocaust scholar in residence here, David Crowe, and he's going to talk about the historical event and specifically what happened. The monument that I built, the sculpture that I'm building, is inspired by these women. We don't know that day. She stood there, she looked at us in the camera, the bravery, they held arm to arm. I saw that photograph, it broke my heart, and I was never the same. Maybe afterwards she took off her boots, maybe this, maybe that, we don't know what happened, but the monument will serve as a form of education and serve to help North Carolina's Education Act, which says that we have to teach Holocaust education. Okay, so why a sculpture? Why in a public place? Why now? How do we explain Jews shot to death at Shabbat prayers in synagogues in Pittsburgh and in California? How do we explain Orthodox Jewish men and women violently being harassed and pursued in Brooklyn, New York today? In New Jersey, a synagogue someone is shot right in front of a synagogue. When did this happen? Did this happen a long time ago during the time of the Holocaust? No, this is recent. The past year brought the third highest spike of anti-Semitism on record. The Jewish population is less than 3% in America. And then the majority of reported religious crimes of hatred were done by against Jewish people and their religion. So that's the why. The why is, as an artist, when I walked with a group of Greensboro people, children and adults, we went on the March of the Living. I walked through Auschwitz, and it's as if the voice of the women were screaming in my ears, remember us, tell our story. So then when I saw this photograph of the women, I just thought, the incredible, how they stood in front of us, and they were just women. They were my Jewish brothers and sisters. They were not my brothers, my Jewish sisters. And I thought, I have got to do something. So the difference between, let's say, a sculpture that an artist does and a monument is that the monument is in a public place. It also is a placemaking. When I see Jewish placemaking, what I mean is this is a place where we will congregate to teach about Holocaust education. You will see this sculpture. The women will be about 5.5 feet tall, 5 to 6 feet tall. I was very inspired by Rodin's. I don't know if you know his sculptures, the Burghers of Calais. This monument won't be up in the ground, but it'll be down on the floor. So if you see Rodin, you can see that the figures are, the men are just, they're giving up themselves because there's an invading army. And they said, take us, we're the most wealthy in the community, and save the city. So Rodin portrayed these men in different forms of humility, anger, fear, right before they were being killed. And that's how I was inspired, that these sculptures would be on the ground, that we would be able to walk around them. And again, next year it will be a monument that will have the picture of them, a piece of sculpture that will be a part of it, that will also have the historic event exactly as it happened. The idea of the camera. Now, the camera used that day is going to be at somewhere in the monument where the education information is. But we will have viewers look through a lens, a type of a lens, because that's how we bear witness. And that's how sculpture, Jewish placemaking, that the community becomes a part of the sculpture by actually participating, by looking through a lens. Now, because the camera used, and David will talk about it, is I think he researched it, he'll talk about it, it might be small. So as an artist, we will be doing a type of a lens. The idea is that we want the children, we want adults to actually do something physical that they are bearing witness. Something historic happened. Greensboro, North Carolina, and it's right here, I'm so proud of it. It is the resolution from the city council that they accepted this monument to be in a public park, in LeBauer Park. Now you saw a picture of it, but I just want to tell you how important it is that this happened by the community coming together. From John Swain and the Civil Rights Museum to bipartisan support on the state level, John Hardister and Senator Astor, who's a Democrat and Republican. Also on the state level, the state level, we have support. All of the leaders, Jews, non-Jews, of all colors, have come together and said, yes, I'm going to walk from the Civil Rights Museum over to this monument because we're a city that takes down, renames streets. I won't say exactly what has happened, but we know what's happening in this country. We are going to build monuments and sculptures that speak about the humanity that we want our world to be. We need artwork that speaks about injustice and that also focuses on women and children. I really believe that. So this being a women's Holocaust monument, I think is really important. We actually also, I think this is kind of historic. The first time Central Park, Central Park, New York, Manhattan, this big city, they've never had a monument for women, and they just erected one for women. And it was also done by a woman sculptor. So Greensboro, North Carolina is right in line to what's happening in our country. And I'm so, so very proud of it. The former head rabbi of England. His name is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, just passed away. I'm going to quote him. He says, there's optimism and hope. What's the difference between optimism and hope? Optimism is things will get better. Now for Jews, and what I just told you about the statistics of anti-Semitism, we're not always so optimistic, but Jews are hopeful. Hope is about the work that we do together as a community. I hope and know that as a community, we work together to remember social injustice, racism for our brown and Black brothers and sisters, for education inequalities, institutional inequalities in our community. And I think that this monument serves to also recognize that. So I'll be around later. I'm going to hand it, I think it's time to hand over to Liz. And you can ask me some questions about any kind of questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for your explanation. And as we know, Vicky's going through a process. It's going to be set up at her studio. So people in the community will have the opportunity to get involved, to actually sculpt with Victoria. She's going to have some internships. There's going to be a lot of exciting things. So you'll have to check out Women of the Shoah or jewishplacemaking.org to find out more about it. But again, thank you. So right now, it is my honor to introduce David M. Crowe. As we said, he's the President Fellow of Chapman University, who's going to give us a historical perspective on what happened. David is the Emeritus Professor of Emeritus of History and Law at Elon University. He's a specialist in international criminal law, the Holocaust, and the history of Romanian people in Eastern Europe, Russia, and the 20th century China. He has served as an expert witness in court cases in the United States and Canada, and testified both before the US Congress, Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, and New York City's Council Committee on Immigration. His numerous books have been translated into 6 languages, and I'm going to just name a few of them just to give you an idea. He's written The Holocaust, The History, the Roots, and the Aftermath, 2 editions. Another book is Stalin's Soviet Justice, Show Trials, War Crimes, Trials in Nuremberg. He wrote a book on war crimes, genocide, and injustice. The definition and biography of Oskar Schindler, the untold account of his life and wartime activities, and the true story behind the list. He's currently working on a very exciting project with Raphael Lemkin, The Life of a Visionary, which looks deeply at the life and history of this remarkable Russian Jewish lawyer who coined and defined the word genocide in 1944 and became the driving force behind the UN adoption of the Genocide Convention in 1948. We are so honored to hear about the massacre from our wonderful scholar, David Crowe. David, welcome.
In the fall of 1940, Adolf Hitler began planning for the invasion of Russia the following year. He had 2 problems. The first, of course, was the size of the Soviet Union, its population. And secondly, it's what the Nazis called the Jewish question. A week before Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, the Nazis and the Soviets created a pact. And part of that pact was dividing Poland into 2 parts. The Germans took the western part, and the Soviets got the eastern part with its large Jewish population. The Germans took their part and created something called the general government, which they considered their racial laboratory. 4 of the 6 death camps that they would open beginning in late 1941 on into 1942 were located in the German parts of occupied Poland. German policy towards Jews, going back to Hitler coming to power as Chancellor in 1933, was essentially in Germany for the first 6 years of the Nazi rule, was to simply rip the Jews from the fabric of German society. They also followed these policies when they took over Austria in the spring of 1938 and Czechoslovakia in 1938 and 1939. When they got to Poland, they adopted a new policy, which was ghettoization. And they followed through with this to some degree when they took over Western Europe in 1940. By the time you get to late 1940, the Nazis consider themselves invincible. They've taken over or conquered all of these countries in Central Europe, much of Western Europe. And they now feel, as they face one of their second biggest problem in dealing with the Soviet invasion, the large Jewish population. If you add the Jews in the Soviet occupied part of Poland with the number of Jews in Russia itself, you've got 4.5 to 5 million Jews. They for two reasons. Number one, they can't handle this issue. And secondly, they've reached the point of arrogance that they feel that they can now begin to talk about a final solution. Ghettoization is not going to work. They never cared for ghettoization because it was too expensive to run the ghettos. Thus, they chose to starve Jews to death. In early 1941, Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, issues a call for volunteers to join special Einsatz action squads. They later become known as the Einsatzgruppen. They were flooded with volunteers who saw in joining these units a step up the ladder professionally in the Nazi movement. So much of what drove Nazi killing was professionalism. Yes, there was the racial hatred, but these were opportunists who deeply embraced the Nazi movement and did whatever was necessary to further their careers. Those who were selected for training for the Einsatzgruppen were taken to special bases, and they were trained in, they sort of clouded really what it was all about, but anybody in the know in the SS or the SI knew exactly what they were for. It was to sweep in behind German military units as they went into Russia. And as they came into shtetls and villages and towns, they would simply round up and murder Jews. From late June 1941 until the end of December 1941, the Einsatzgruppen murdered over 500,000 Jews. In late July, a little more than a month after the invasion of Russia, and for the Germans, it was going swimmingly well, they decided they murdered these operations in the field. They're not secretive, they're messy, they're psychologically problematic for some of the killers. And so the Nazi leadership decides to issue a special directive called the Enlosung, the final solution. By the fall of 1941, they begin to experiment with various methods of death. When we get to the murders that took place in Libya from the 15th to the 17th of December 1941, a month earlier at Chełmno, which is in Western German-occupied Poland, the Germans have begun to experiment with gas fans. By 1942, they're opening the 5 other death camps. They're shifting. And so what took place at Libya sort of marks an important turning point. It doesn't mean the Einsatzgruppen are going to go away. By the time we get to the spring of 1942, the death camps are being opened. But the Einsatzgruppen are still operating. They're coming back around to earlier territory they had seized, finding hidden Jews. In 1944, they're used to go back to these killing spots, dig up bodies, and burn the evidence. Many of the commanders of the Einsatzgruppen were well-trained German lawyers. They knew that they were committing war crimes. And in 1944, wedged as they are between the Allies and the Germans, they're beginning to think about war crimes trials. What took place at Libya actually is to the north of the city, about 8 miles at Skara Beach. Why? Libya lies 600 miles south of the Arctic Circle. The weather was brutally cold. Winds off the Baltic. The ground was frozen. They couldn't dig pits at Libya. So they went north to the beach, and it's big, thick, grainy, gray sand, very thick. And a few days before, the SS came in, and the SA, and they personally dug this long pit. They were so good at this. They had been doing this for 6 months. They were masters at mass murder. They were totally efficient, and they if you can say this, it's a gruesome thought, but they were artists at mass murder. They were so good at it. So they came and knew exactly how to measure the pit. They knew exactly how to build sort of a barrier using the sand to block actually what was taking place. They even built a stepway below the mound. They would murder in groups of 20. They would drive people into truck. They would about almost 2,800 people were murdered during that 3-day period. They were brought in by trucks. They were male and female at different times. They would put them in a nearby barn. And then as with each episode of murder, they would then bring 20 out at a time. The little shelf on one side of the pit could only hold 5 or 6 people. Across the pit, and this is how they did things. Let's say, for example, because there was an SS non-com officer, Stott, who had a small, what we call a submarine camera. It had been made for the submariners. I think he probably got it from the nearby German naval base. And taking pictures like this was frowned upon. This was supposed to be secret. They did not want Germans going back to Germany and showing this to their families or things like that. So this was all highly secretive. Of the 8 or 9 shots that he made of the mass murders, they're all shot at a distance. You can tell that he was probably wearing a greatcoat and probably hid his camera and just from a distance shot it. Very good camera. The one that Victoria is using to do her sculpture is the only one that was posed. And even that was done very, very quickly. They were so, how can I say, they were so self-directed, the Nazis, when they did that they wanted to make sure that when they murdered someone in this firing squad scenario, that they were dead. They didn't want people having to go back through the pile of dead bodies and have to shoot them in the head if they were still moaning. So if there were 6 victims on this sand shelf, they would have 12 shooters, 2 riflemen per victim. And we know not only from the photographs about this, but we know from war crimes trials after. He's even mentioned at Nuremberg. But we also have other war crimes trials. And I apologize for the gruesomeness of it, but I think it's important to understand, because the other part of the thing it's really important to understand is the issue of collaboration. There is no way the Germans, in whatever part of Europe you're talking about, could have killed 2/3 of the Jewish population of Europe, Jews and Germans alone. They're fighting a war on 2 fronts. So there's going to be extremely active collaboration all over Nazi-occupied Europe when they're murdering Jews, Roma, the handicapped, or whatever. In the case of what took place at Skerta Beach outside of Libya, they had several Latvian units who really enjoyed what they were doing, and they were very actively involved. We also know that there was a nearby German naval base, and there were Marines in the background. They were just watching and so forth. This was frowned upon, but this was a peculiar episode. They would truck in, and the other thing about this, and it just goes to the mechanical aspect of this, and again, it's gruesome, and I almost apologize for even mentioning it, but you're dealing with the murder of almost the entire Jewish population of this shtetl, Libya, 2,700 plus people over 3 days. Remember, the days are very short in that part of Europe during that time of year. You're talking about the sun coming up maybe at 8 o'clock, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's dark. It means that somehow they're going to have to murder 900 people a day. And so everything is incredibly fast moving. Some of the pictures that Stott shot shows women, several shots of women naked. One of them is just freezing from the bitter cold. It's below 0. We've got these chill factors off the Baltic Sea. I mean, the dehumanization is just absolutely incredible, but it's something that, again, the Nazis were masters at. And you have they will bring out a group of 20. The first thing would require them to, at the very beginning, is they had to strip naked. Now, why? Well, part of it's dehumanization, but also remember that the Nazis, whenever they committed actions like this, they were convinced Jews were hiding secret wealth in their clothing. And so after the shootings, they would go through the clothing very carefully. They were required by German law to then send, if they found gold or anything like that, to send it back to the Reichsbank. A lot of it was stolen, of course. But in addition, after the shootings were over, they would pack all the clothing in trucks, send back to Germany for distribution to the German public. This was practiced all throughout the war. They didn't leave anything. At Auschwitz, you had these huge storage depots of Jewish clothing and goods that the inmates called Canada. And then we have this iconic photograph. I used one of Stott's figures in one of my Holocaust books because what took place at Skata Beach is one of the few examples where we really have, where we have detail. Now, the Einsatzgruppen commanders, they wrote deadly reports back to Berlin. They were proud of what they were doing. They knew that promotions would depend on the figures. And we have very exacting figures of how many they were murdering here and how many they were murdering there. What's interesting is how they would closet this in legalese. Because one of the issues that drove the German actions in Russia was this idea of Jewish Bolshevism. It's the idea that goes back to the early years of the Nazi Party in the early 1920s. And that is the idea that the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 was essentially a Jewish plot to take over the world. And so in the Nazi mind, collectively, the linkage of the Jews and communism, Bolshevism, this was the ultimate racial enemy. The ferocity with which the Germans essentially enacted a racial war against Jews is really important in understanding the nature of the mass killings taking place. Now, what we see in this photograph, and then in Victoria's wonderful sculptor, is 4 women and a young girl. Each of us, when we look at this photograph, and even more so when we see the statue, which I think will bring it to life, is something I find very touching. Each of us will interpret it in a different way. For those of us who spend a lot of time in Eastern Europe and Russia, it's very common to see women walking arm in arm down the street as an act of friendship, an act of love, a act of affection. It's something very, very East European and Russian. You don't see it in the West very much. And what I saw, this is a momentary shot. These women, they can hear the gunshots nearby. They know that women are being marched to this sand shelf and being shot. And what I see in their faces is this strength. These are observant Jewish women of deep faith. What I see in their arms together is a strength that is unimaginable. I also see something that is beyond spiritual resistance. I see it as something that's more weapons of the spirit, in the sense that they're on the eve of their death and they're standing tall in front of this Nazi. And in that moment, they're standing tall, they're standing strong. And in my heart of hearts, I like to think that because these are women of faith, that as they face the valley of death, they're comforted by the fact that the Lord is their shepherd. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Wow, I just want to remind everyone we will be taking questions after, so still feel free to start writing them in. So the next person that I have the great honor to introduce is Shelley Weiner. Shelley Weiner is a Holocaust survivor. She is Women of the Shoah Jewish Placemaking, one of our co-founders. And she's going to share her story. Shelley, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. During the Holocaust and the Second World War, I was a hidden child. I was hidden with my mother and my aunt and my cousin by a Ukrainian family in a village. And I was 4, my cousin was 5, and it was very difficult at that time for non-Jews, Christians, to help Jews, because the Nazis would come through the villages looking for the Jews. The neighbors would be informing, and the Ukrainian police were always looking for Jews. So of course, this farmer did not want to hide us because he had a son and a daughter still living at home. And what would happen if they found out was that they would kill him and his entire family. And the neighbors were, it was very frightening, because people, the Ukrainian, if they turned in a Jew, they would get a kilo of sugar for it. Kilo of sugar is around 2.5 pounds. That's what we were worth. At any rate, this farmer had a son who was 18 years old. And like David said, the Germans could not have accomplished what they did with murdering all the Jews without the help of the local population. Well, they would have pamphlets that they would distribute in the villages, and to ask them to come and work, and they would get paid. Well, this young man and a group of his friends, they didn't know what the work was, and they went into town, the town I was born in, called Rovna. And they happened to get there that day when this massacre, the same type of massacre where they were shooting all the Jews, murdering all the Jews of Rovna. And in that day, my entire family was killed. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my grandparents. Anyway, this young man and his friends were horrified by what they saw, and they ran back to the village. Well, they happened to get there just as my mother was begging the farmer to hide us. And he was the one that convinced his parents that they should hide us. Now, the reason I'm involved in this project, and it means so much, is because of the brave women during the Holocaust. For me personally, it was my mother and my aunt. Unbelievable how 2 women in their 20s at the time could keep 2 little girls quiet and safe in an attic that the farmer, of the barn that the farmer created. And we experienced cold all the time. We experienced the heat. We had very little food. The worst thing was the mice and the rats and the lice. It was a terrible situation. We just slept on straw, and all we had was 1 blanket, and we didn't have any toys. We didn't have any books. But anyway, one of the most traumatic things that happened during our hiding was after we had been in that barn attic for 20 months, the farmer came and said, someone informed on you and you need to come down. And they're coming to get you. Well, I don't know what possessed us. But my cousin and I, we were 5 and 6 at the time. We begged our mothers not to just go down, but we knew there was a back door to the barn and that we should run into the woods. The woods were right next to, to the barn. And they somehow agreed. So we was dark and we ran in, but we could hear them. We were hiding in the woods, but we could hear them looking for us. And I guess by some miracle, something diverted them and they left. And so as morning came, the farmer, he found us. He stood on the roof of his house and we couldn't go back to the barn. So we had to go, we went into the wheat fields. The wheat was high, it was very hot. And for 3 days, we had no food, no water. It was terrible. Anyway, the farmer found us and he said, well, you can't go back into the barn. But he was tired of the German army coming and taking his grain and his corn and his feed. So he did a bunker for his produce and put his grain and everything in it. He said, you know what, I'll dig another bunker out for you. And that's where you'll be. And that's where we were for 8 months. And that was a lot worse than the attic and the barn because it was dark, it was cold, we had very little light. And at that time, the war was 1943, end of 43, 44, I guess. Food was very, very scarce. So we just had enough food to not starve. And that's where we were for 8 months. And then we were liberated by the Russian army in 1944. But the important thing that I think about this monument is that there will be a visual place where teachers can come and people can come and that they'll be educated of the horrors of the Holocaust and that it could happen again. And that it'll be preserved and like I said, a visual education piece. And that is very necessary at this time in history because people like me, Holocaust survivors, are fading away. And we have to keep the story going because we don't want these atrocities to ever happen again. And so we need to be vigilant and be the ones that make this education possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. So when you go to the website, you see the beginning of the monument, you're going to see the arms. And actually, we are naming the monument after Shelley's mother, Ava Weiner, and Sophia Gerlnick, in memory of them. So we are so honored that we are doing that and that it will be in their army. And the other thing that we all keep forgetting is that when you look at the camera, people at the site, we're doing a pre-Holocaust curriculum before they go to the site. At the site, they'll be able to move around it and use a QR that will go to the website to give them history and then post the event. So we are putting together all those pieces. That's the plan. We're in the beginning stages, obviously. But also part of the reason why the camera's there is also that those women were killed just because they were Jewish. That's the only reason. And they were women and children that had lives and homes and love, and they were killed just because they were Jewish. So the next part, and again, I want to encourage everyone to write questions to Shelley, to David, to Victoria, because after Marilyn is the next piece, which is a very important piece. It is really also my honor to introduce a great leader in the Jewish community, Marilyn Chandler. She's the executive director of Greensboro Jewish Federation. She has directed the highly respected, engaged Greensboro Jewish Federation since 1988. She created the success of the small and mighty federation to the outstanding partnership between volunteers and professional leadership. She's led the community through annual and special campaigns, resulting in over multi-million donations to go towards local Jewish communities, and has spearheaded annual campaigns to Jews in Israel and global Jewish communities. Maryland also spearheaded resettlement efforts in the former Soviet Union, overseas study missions, including interfaith missions to Israel and other worldwide locations, and has developed the Sister City Partnership in Belzi, Moldova. She holds an MSW from the Walter School of Social Work and of Yeshiva University, and she's been really supportive with this new initiative. Welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to the Greensboro Historical Museum and to Rodney Dawson and his crew for hosting Liz and Victoria, David, Shelley, and me for this very important program. We want to share with all viewers tonight photos of women who have visited Victoria in her artist studio on Elm Street. They are women who believe strongly in this project, in the importance of bringing this meaningful and beautiful sculpture to Greensboro, and are overjoyed that our Greensboro City Council has approved the placing of it in Carolyn's Garden in LeBauer Park. It will stand just a few minutes walk from the International Civil Rights Center and Museum, the place where 4 men sat down at the Woolworth's lunch counter to protect their right to live freely in our city. Juxtapose that history with these 4 women and a young girl of Lapaya standing up, with the matriarch wearing her boots in protest, linked arm in arm with her daughters and granddaughter, stoically standing tall, standing strong against Nazi killers. Remember us, tell our story, she says to us. I'm just going to share my screen for just a minute. Whoop. Just to share some photos with you that are located in Victoria's studio. And we ask you to send in a similar photo of your family or your friends linked arm in arm to remember the women of Lapaya. I'm going to just share some of those photos with you. Victoria is creating a wall from Lapaya, representing the women of Lapaya in her studio. And which one would you like to be? And what would you say? Would you be the youngest with her head bent in terror, clutching her fists? Or would you be the older woman in the center with her boots looking straight at us in defiance? Or would you be the teenager on the end, fixing her hair? Which one would you be? Tonight, December 15th, is the 79th anniversary of this massacre in 1941, which occurred during the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. The story of Hanukkah recounts the Maccabees who rose up against the Syrians in the year 165 BCE, who defiantly resisted assimilation. The miracle of Hanukkah represents both a military victory and the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem and the rekindling of lights to remember oil that lasted for 8 days. Thus, we light candles on the menorah for 8 days. Women of the Shoah, Jewish placemaking, she wouldn't take off her boots, shows both bravery and defiance, as well as the power of human resistance against injustice. We light the menorah tonight in their memory, and we sing the blessings of Hanukkah to bring light to a world where darkness reigns, and to remember to bring light and miracles into our world today. So I'm bringing you into my daughter's family home right now, where I am with my newest grandbaby. And we are going to light the Hanukkah menorah together with my new grandson and with my daughter and son-in-law here in Greensboro via Philadelphia. So we're going to just, here we are. I'm going to ask that, great, I have some assistance here. And for those who would like to, feel free to sing with us as we light the Hanukkah menorah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu b'adekner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa b'mitzvoteinu v'yamim ha'em b'zman hazeh.
Hayamim hahem, hayamim hahem b'zman hazeh.
Amen. Wow. Wow.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And I'm moved. I don't even know what to say. The light of Hanukkah is within us and the spirit of these women who passed on. And I just want to say to everyone, you know, when we decided who to pick, we had to think of who it is that we had the most thought about. And I remember the two women at the end are Sorella Epstein and Rosa Epstein. Rosa is the mother and Sorella is the 10-year-old girl. And my spirit, I remember Sorella today. And everything that we do will inevitably remember that what they died, they didn't die for anything. And it goes on. So anyway, at this point, we are opening up for questions. So Rodney, you're going to have to help with this because I can't see them on my screen. But please introduce the people and say their question and who should be answering it.
All right, today is my new best friend, so I'm gonna go with him first. I got a call from a gentleman. He was all the way from New York, and he has a wonderful story that we need to hear later on. But Stephen Lutzen has this question. It says, have any of you, of the participants, of our panelists, have any of you ever visited La Paja?
No, but we're planning a mission. As soon as COVID's over, Shelley and all of us on the Women of Shoah, JP, and the board, and we're going to have a mission. Marilyn, hopefully, we'll all be together. That's something that we're looking forward to. There's actually a museum. I think Steve can tell you about it. Also, I want to thank you, Rodney, by the way, P.S.
Yes, I've been to Latvia quite a few times.
All right, thank you for that. And Gail LeBauer chimes in, and she's got not more of just a statement that I think that last song that Marilyn led kind of brought us all here, but she particularly is talking about Shelley, Miss Weiner. Says Shelley and her mom and her aunt had this strength that always puts her at all. And you ladies and Dr. Crowe, you're putting us all at all, at least myself, you're putting me at all this evening. So thank you for that. Denise Tingley says, such an amazing story. Thank you for sharing, Shelley, I'm tongue-tied. an amazing story, and thank God for the farmer's son. Did your family stay in contact with the farmer and his family, by the way? That's the question.
Well, the farmer and his family passed away soon after the war, and but we did stay in touch with the daughter that lived on the farm. And then she told, because all these people in the village were anti-Semitic, so the only one that knew about us was a grandson. And we stayed in touch with the grandson after the daughter passed away. And then in 2013, I went to the village and the farm with the grandson and my daughters and my cousin. And when we walked in there, it was amazing, because my cousin and we immediately recognized that the barn was still there. The underground bunker was still there. Of course, we were grown-ups, so everything looked so little to us. We could not believe that we had spent all that time in hiding when we were so little, because at this point we had our own children, so we knew what children were like. And so, like I said, it was the bravery of our mothers who were able to keep us going in there. And through the heat and cold and hunger and inability to go outside and play, and so we went back again in 2016, and with another group of my family. And I never did know really why the farmer hit us. I think I know what my mother told me, but it was such a brave and kind thing for him and his family to do. I don't know how many people and how I would react if my family's lives were at stake, to do what he did and to have the the responsibility that he had and the fears that they had, both he and his wife. I think it's amazing. And so I am an optimist, really, because I believe in the goodness of people. And as horrible as that was, and that I do miss not having a family, an extended family, this farmer and his wife shows you that there is kindness in the world.
All right. And to learn more, what a wonderful, impactful story that you have. But if you want to learn more, just please check out our History Notes podcast soon. We have a podcast featuring your story and attaching it to the monument that will come out in the very near future. Because you just touched on part of it. That I've heard some things you've done in the past, and plus with the podcast that we did, you go a little bit more in depth. So you fascinated us with this short version of it, and I appreciate that. This next question I want to present to Dr. Crowe. Dr. Crowe, at the sand shelf, Jewish women and children, where were the Jewish men of the town?
Well, they were separated. In other words, they would bring in all the women from the town over, say, a day or something like that. But they always, whenever they did this, they always separated men from, and in this particular case, they were storing the people. That's a terrible word to use, but it's essentially what they were doing. There was a barn nearby, and they would truck them in from Lipia, put the people, as many as the barn would hold, and then more trucks would come in. But so there were no men around other than the Germans and the Latvians who were taking part in the murders.
Okay, thank you. And we do have someone that's looking for the link again. So after this next question, I'm asking if we can just repeat the link, and we'll put it in the chat for the website I'm talking about, Liz. This next question is for Victoria specifically. How did you come to learn about this photo? How did you come upon the photo?
So I actually, Brett Stevens is a writer, and he wrote about this photo, and he said, if you read the article, it's "Tell Them I'm Not Afraid." Somehow there's a connection to some people who know some people in that village. And so that's where I saw the photograph. And it was after I'd been on March of the Living. And then I did a TED Talk where I talked about the photograph and the pastel. And so it's sort of like a whole journey, but that's the first time that I actually saw the photograph as my inspiration for this Holocaust monument.
All right. And I'm trying to get the questions in. We have time for a few more, but go to the Q&A and type them in. Shelly Capozzi says, Victoria, I am the daughter of 2 survivors from Poland. My mother's maiden name was Milstein, spelled Milstztein, from Lublin. I hope I pronounced that.
We're Milstein, which is my husband's family. And okay, interesting.
From where?
From Poland. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Wow. Thank you for that.
Belarus.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so it's a possibility the family could be connected to Lublin. And Ann Parsons says this, and she's thanking everyone. Ann Parsons over at UNCG does wonderful work over there. Thank you to everyone so much for sharing. She wants to thank Shelley, particularly for sharing her story. Thank you, David, for sharing your wisdom, and Marilyn for sharing the candle lighting ceremony. And finally, Victoria and Elizabeth, for all the work that you're bringing to this amazing monument in Greensboro. It's powerful. And here's the question. According to Yad Vashem, the website, there's some question about the names of the women in the photograph. I was wondering if either Vicky or Elizabeth could talk some more about looking into the history of this photograph and the women.
I think that's first of all, Ann Parsons is doing an incredible Holocaust project herself. So I hope Rodney, you get to hear what she's doing. It's an incredible project. And I'm gonna, Liz, I think we should put that to David. Liz, you're on mute.
No, am I on mute?
You're
No.
not, but Liz, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Okay.
But David, do you know, because
So-
there's different, go ahead, Liz. David.
No, I just, in agreement.
Yeah,
Part of
David,
the
yeah,
reason-
because there's different things from the Yad Vashem.
Right. So one of the things that, of course, is very, very important, we've just begun. I mean, literally this 501c3, the new Women of the Shoah, Jewish placemaking is brand new. And we're beginning to put in the whole infrastructure. And it's very important as we teach the Holocaust education that it's accurate. And we really realize that. We're learning. And part of the reason why we've recruited, and we hope David will continue to work with us, is for him to give us the scholarly background and do all the research, because you're right, there is different sort of views about who exactly the women were. There's even the story about David Crone, who was the electrician at the SD office, who found the four rolls of film that were taken from, and he hid them in a box and took them out during the Nuremberg trials. So that's also on the Yad Vashem, and whether it's true or not, and which piece of the resistance. So, David, can you add to that? Do you know anything more about?
What she's referring is Yad Vashem on their website. They've got the photographs, and they list 2 different sets of names. In other words, this is, and they got this from survivors and children of survivors, in terms of actually visually knowing from the photographs who these people were. But no, but this is not uncommon, because these are people that are being murdered and gassed and cremated. And there's Yad Vashem has come up with on their website, they've come up with a figure of 3 million. They've been able to identify the location and the time of death for 3 million of Jews who were murdered by the Germans. But that probably is one of the great tragedies, is that for survivors and children of survivors, they don't know where to mourn. In other words, you don't know if you were to Blinker or Auschwitz or things like that. Something like this, they didn't have transport records. I mean, in some of the transports during the Shoah, the Nazis kept very detailed lists. SS would keep daily lists of Jews. For example, in the Chandler story, we have a series of lists that we know about who was transported where and at what time and things like that. But so often, particularly in these Einsatzgruppen murders, they would sweep through a village or a shtetl, and they would kill everybody. And I mean, there was in this particular village, according to the Jewish Association of Latvia, and some other works, war crimes records and things like that, they murdered almost every Jew in this village. I mean, if there were 20 or 30 that somehow survived the war, that would have been a very lucky 30, because they were that thorough when they would sweep through an area like this. And their goal was to make what they said, to make Latvia or Estonia or parts of Russia what they call Judenfrei, Jewish free. And they would brag about these statistics back in Berlin.
And I want to mention that the photograph also, if you Google it on the internet, it comes under vintage because they're wearing underclothes. And when you're going to see my sculpture at the end, you're going to see that she's wearing a bra and panties. But because they're wearing underclothes and boots, it's under vintage clothing. So that's how much we need Holocaust education, that you can actually Google vintage clothing and that's the picture that comes up.
And thank you. And I'm gonna close out with two more questions. This is for Marilyn Chandler. What's on the horizon with the Greensboro Jewish Federation? When you're approaching a topic such as this, and especially when you're dealing with our young folks, how have you had to approach this subject, or what's your experience been like?
Rodney, thank you so much for answering that question. And the answer has to be education. It's bringing people like Shelley, who is an incredible human being, in addition to being an incredible woman and an incredible speaker, to classrooms all over the state of North Carolina, which Shelley has been doing for years now, and sharing her story. It's about the efforts of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, which is involved in bringing speakers to communities, and also training teachers about the Holocaust from all over the state. We absolutely support their efforts. We try to send students and teachers overseas and also to the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. So if people have not yet seen that museum, when you're able to get there for sure. We bring students to Israel to learn about history, and we bring students as well to Poland on a program called the March of the Living, where they actually walk from Auschwitz to Birkenau, two of the major killing camps, to learn the story. Because once you've really learned the story and you've been involved and engaged in educational programs, then I think you really begin to understand.
All right, thank you. And finally, Sue Simmons is answering this in the chat. And I do want to say this only because folks are going to be watching the archives of this on YouTube. But it's Women of the Shoah, jp.org. So WOMENOFTHESHOAH, J as in Juliet, P as in Paul.org to learn more. What you're talking about, Marilyn, and what we're talking about with this monument costs money. So like I said, it was answered in the chat, but what's the fundraising like? Is this publicly funded, private funds? What if we want to donate, what do we need to do?
So I think we'll give that to Liz, and then Rodney, don't forget to do a plug for the exhibit that's up right now.
Will do, thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Liz.
You're muted.
Can you hear me? Okay.
And now you.
Yes. So this is privately funded. We will be getting funding from, we're doing a lot, we're just starting. So we're beginning the fundraising process. It will be funded by the community, by grants. And anybody who wants to get involved in either supporting it and also get involved in terms of we're putting together our committees and our advisory committees, please go to the website. It's Women of the Shoah, JP, which stands for JewishPlacemaking.org. And reach out to any of us, Victoria, me, Marilyn, Shelley, any of us to get more information. Does that
Shelley's help is really, Shelley's help is really important. Thank you, Shelley, for your help.
Yeah, everyone's help is important. Yes, yes, vital. People don't really know that we've had probably 8 or 9 months of community support. We had an ad hoc committee from the city of Greensboro with Rob Oberman chairing it. We've also had 25 different people, everyone, even from Elon Carr, the State Department head of anti-Semitism, supporting it. We've had tremendous Randall Kaplan, John Swain, the LeBowers, Michael Abramson, Rabbi Gutman, Rabbi Ben Gideon. We've had, I mean, the list goes on, all the faculty from UNCGH. So we're really encouraged by the support of the local community, which is what this is about. It's about placemaking. It's about building it in local communities. And that's where this is happening. And it's not about money, because that's the part, the least important. It is, but it isn't. It's really about everyone's support and getting involved and investing their time and their interest in making this happen.
Thank you for that. You know, this whole webinar series started because I had a conversation with you and Victoria. When Victoria came, she has a mural being displayed in the Pieces of Now exhibit at the Greensboro History Museum that you can check out. But she came to do a recording because accompanying her mural is a video, short video. She's talking about what led her to paint that mural. And we got to talking. And I like to think we hit it off right there in the studio, in the museum, but she invited me to her studio and Liz was there and we started talking. We said Holocaust education. And we started putting this together, and then here we are in December, and this is where we are. But it's a wonderful exhibit. We took not all, but some of the murals that were downtown, you know, as the businesses boarded up and artists came in and started painting on this plywood. And it's turned into much more than that. There's a lot of conversations with city leaders and just galvanizing and bringing people together. And this is a byproduct of that exhibit. We never would have met had it not been for Pieces of Now. And it kind of, you all encapsulated or summarized exactly what that exhibit is, you know, just community, you know, and helping one another and making things known, educating folks so that atrocities don't happen again. So I appreciate you for that. And I want to thank Marilyn, Chandler, Dr. David Crowe, Victoria Milstein, and thank you to your husband for helping out in the background. Dr. Crowe, thank you to your wife for keeping you well lit and making you look good this afternoon or this evening. And Liz Alberti, my new friend, we're friends by months, but we're gonna have to break bread when COVID settles down a little bit. And then Shelley Weiner. Shelley, you're a beautiful, amazing woman. I'm just so glad I got a chance to know you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. This ends our Holocaust Education series. It's part 3, Women of the Shoah, Art as a Social Sculpture. I was telling Stephen Lutzen when I was talking to him earlier, I've learned a lot of Yiddish.
Stephen,
month or so. I wish Stephen could get on, but he said Minch. He said Minch. He told me I was a solid guy.
I was going to say to you, Kola Kavod. So Kola Kavod, we say Kola Kavod, which Kavodah is your heart and your love. Like, congratulations to your heart. Congratulations for who you are. So Kola Kavod from us, and happy Hanukkah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And a very special thank you to our audience. You know, we couldn't do it without you. Your support helps us keep these type of programs going. And not only tonight's guest, but extended thank you to our previous panelists, Dr. Kelly Brown, who wrote the book Sound of Hope, and Elizabeth Rosner, author of Survivor Cafe. And of course, the panelists we've had tonight. Thanks for being so giving of your time and your experiences. Thank you to Catherine and Glenn in the background, our director, Carol Hart, and thank you for everyone. And look out for our next webinar series in 2021, where we'll tackle police relations in the city in February, followed by a fantastic series on the immigration experience in Greensboro in March. So thank you again, everyone, and good night.
Thank you. Good night. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.